It was a Tuesday evening. The kind of day that should have faded into the background. Just another routine night in my marriage. But something about it stuck with me, every second etched into my mind like a bad dream you can't shake. Maybe it was the way the air felt heavier than usual, or how quiet the house had been when I walked in. Or maybe it was just Lorraine, standing there in the kitchen, scrolling through her phone, not even looking up when I arrived. At first glance, nothing seemed out of place. She was dressed casually, but deliberately. A sweater I had always complimented before, jeans that fit her just right, makeup just a little more polished than usual. But it was the hair that made me pause. She had curled it, something she rarely did unless we were going somewhere important. It wasn't like her to get this dressed up for dinner with coworkers. I dropped my keys onto the counter, their clatter breaking the heavy silence. "What's the occasion?" I asked, watching her closely. Lorraine finally looked up, her expression unreadable. "Oh, just grabbing dinner with some people from work." That was the first red flag. She didn't name names. Normally, she would. She was the kind of person who gave details, who was coming, where they were going, what the conversation would probably be about. But this time, she kept it vague. "Just some people from work." "Where at?" I asked, trying to sound casual. "Just a little place downtown. Nothing fancy." Another vague answer. That wasn't like her. Lorraine loved talking about restaurants. If it was somewhere new, she would have gone on about the menu, about the cocktails, about how she had been dying to try it. If it was a favorite spot, she would have been telling me about what she was ordering. But this time, nothing. Just a generic, dismissive response. Something in my gut twisted. "You want me to come?" I asked, keeping my tone light, like it was just a joke. She froze. It was barely a second, maybe less, but I caught it. A hesitation so small that someone else might have missed it. But I didn't. Then, as if catching herself, she forced out a laugh. "No, it's just a work thing. You'd be bored out of your mind." Bored? Lorraine and I had been together long enough that I had sat through countless dull conversations with her coworkers. She knew I didn't mind. And yet, here she was, brushing me off like I wasn't even an option. I let out a small chuckle and nodded. "All right, no problem. Have fun." But inside, I felt something shift. As I watched her grab her coat and purse, I noticed something else. Her phone. She picked it up, checked the screen, then turned it face down before slipping it into her bag. That was new. Lorraine never did that. Usually, she just tossed it into her purse, screen up, without a second thought. And then she was gone. I stood in the kitchen, staring at the empty space where she had been just moments ago. The house felt quieter, colder. Something wasn't right. I pulled out my own phone, hesitating for a moment before opening up the location-sharing app we had both installed years ago. Back when we trusted each other. Back when I never had a reason to doubt her. Her location was off. My heart pounded in my chest. She had turned it off. I set my phone down slowly, gripping the edge of the counter to steady myself. My mind raced, trying to rationalize it. Maybe it was a mistake. Maybe she had accidentally disabled it. Maybe, no, I wasn't stupid. I had ignored enough small red flags in the past, brushed things off as paranoia. Not this time. I wasn't just going to sit at home, waiting for her to come back with some vague excuse about why she had turned off her location. I was going to find out exactly where she was going. I stood in the middle of the kitchen for what felt like forever, staring at the spot where Lorraine had been just moments ago. The silence was suffocating. My mind was working overtime, replaying every little detail of our conversation, looking for clues in the way she spoke, the way she avoided eye contact, the way she hesitated just a fraction of a second before answering my questions. This wasn't normal. I wasn't the kind of guy who overthought things. I never checked her phone, never grilled her about where she was going, never gave her a reason to feel like I didn't trust her. Maybe that was my mistake. Maybe I had been too trusting, too blind, because now, for the first time in years, I felt like I had no idea who my wife really was. I walked over to the table, grabbed my phone, and opened up the location-sharing app again. Still off. I swallowed hard, my hands gripping the phone a little tighter. She had turned it off deliberately. That much was clear. There were only two reasons someone did that. Either they didn't want to be disturbed or they didn't want to be found. And I had a sickening feeling it wasn't the first one. For a few minutes, I tried to talk myself down. Maybe it really was just a dinner. Maybe she had a work friend who was going through something personal and she didn't want me to worry. Maybe she just needed a night to herself and she turned off her location because she knew I'd check it and jump to conclusions. But that was the thing, Lorraine didn't know me as someone who jumped to conclusions. If anything, I had spent years trusting her without question. So why would she think I'd suddenly start now? Unless she had a reason to. I needed to clear my head. I walked over to the couch and sat down, my leg bouncing as I tried to figure out my next move. I wasn't going to sit here all night, staring at my phone, waiting for her to come home with some vague excuse. I needed to do something. That's when an idea hit me. I opened my laptop and pulled up my email. A few months ago, Lorraine had booked us a weekend trip through a reservation app that automatically saved our past bookings. She used the same login for a lot of things, I knew that much. If she had made a reservation tonight, even if it wasn't for work, there was a chance it would still be in there. I took a deep breath, typed in her email, and then hesitated. I shouldn't be doing this. This wasn't who I was. But she wasn't supposed to be someone who lied to me either. I entered the password. Wrong. I tried a variation. Wrong again. My stomach tightened. Lorraine never changed her passwords. She had always been the kind of person who used the same login for years, never bothering to update it. But now suddenly it was different. That was another crack in the illusion. I closed the laptop and exhaled slowly, trying to keep my thoughts from spiraling. There had to be another way. I glanced at the clock. She had been gone for nearly an hour now. If she was really just getting dinner, she'd probably be at the restaurant by now. And if that was the case, there was one thing I could do. I grabbed my car keys and headed out the door. I wasn't going to cause a scene. I wasn't going to storm in there demanding answers. I just needed to see it for myself. The drive downtown felt longer than it should have. Maybe it was the weight of my thoughts pressing down on me like a lead blanket. The city lights flickered past, neon signs and street lamps casting strange shadows across the dashboard. My hands gripped the wheel a little too tightly. I knew this wasn't the most rational thing to do, following my own wife like some paranoid detective in a bad movie. But rationality had nothing to do with it anymore. There was something going on and I needed to see it with my own eyes. I had no concrete plan. No rehearsed confrontation. Just a gut feeling gnawing at me, telling me I had to be there. When I finally pulled onto the street where most of the downtown restaurants were clustered, I took a slow lap around the block. The area was packed, people milling about, laughing, couples holding hands as they walked under the glowing signs of trendy new eateries. My eyes scanned the sidewalks, searching for Lorraine's familiar figure. Nothing. I parked a little ways down, across from a row of restaurants, and sat there for a moment, tapping my fingers against the steering wheel. I felt ridiculous. Was I really about to walk into random places, looking for my own wife? What was I even hoping to find? Then, just as I was about to talk myself into going home, I saw her. She was stepping out of a sleek-looking wine bar, laughing. Not just a polite chuckle, the kind of laugh that made her throw her head back slightly, her eyes crinkling at the edges. The kind of laugh I hadn't seen from her in a long time. But it wasn't the laugh that made my stomach drop. It was who she was with. A man. Tall, well-dressed, confident in the way he carried himself. He wasn't a coworker, I would have recognized him. This wasn't some casual work gathering. This wasn't a group dinner. This was a date. I froze. A strange, surreal calm washed over me like my brain refused to fully process what I was seeing. The street noise faded into a dull hum, the laughter of strangers muffled like I was underwater. Lorraine was standing there, still smiling, her hand resting lightly on the man's arm as they spoke. Something inside me cracked. I forced myself to breathe. I needed to be smart. I couldn't just march over there and cause a scene. That would only give her the upper hand, let her play the victim, twist the story into something that made me look unreasonable. No, I needed to be sure. I needed proof. Carefully, I pulled out my phone, angling it just right as I snapped a few photos. The dim lighting wasn't ideal, but it was enough. Enough to capture her looking up at him like he was the most interesting man in the world. Enough to see the way she stood closer to him than she ever did with me anymore. I lowered my phone, my heart pounding so hard it hurt. She had lied to me. Flat out lied. And for what? A fancy dinner with some guy who probably thought she was single? I clenched my jaw, gripping the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles turned white. I wanted to storm over there, grab her by the arm, and demand an explanation. I wanted to see the look on her face when she realized she'd been caught. But I didn't. Because this wasn't about a confrontation. Not yet. This was about knowing. And now I did. I sat in my car, gripping the steering wheel so tightly my fingers ached. The world outside moved in slow motion. Cars passed, people walked, laughter spilled from the bars and restaurants. But I felt like I was frozen in place, watching a version of my life I wasn't supposed to see. Lorraine was still there, just a few yards away, standing under the soft glow of the wine bar's entrance, wrapped in a conversation that seemed far too intimate for a so-called work dinner. She wasn't just talking to this man. She was engaged, her body leaning toward him in a way that sent a bitter chill through me. I tried to analyze every detail, every movement. The way she tucked her hair behind her ear. The way she smiled just a little too long. The way her hand brushed against his forearm, as if testing boundaries she had already shattered. I should have stormed in. I should have walked up, cleared my throat, and let her see me standing there, her husband, the man she had just kissed goodbye an hour ago, now watching her play out whatever fantasy she thought she was living. But I didn't. I wasn't ready. Instead, I sat back, phone in hand, and waited. For nearly 20 minutes, I watched, my chest tightening with every passing second. Eventually, the two of them turned and walked down the sidewalk together. He wasn't just walking her to her car. No, they were headed somewhere. And I knew, deep in my gut, that I needed to know where. I turned on my engine and pulled out slowly, keeping a safe distance as I followed them through the city streets. Lorraine had no idea she was being watched. She laughed. She chatted. She walked beside this man with the kind of ease I hadn't seen from her in years. And me? I was left gripping the wheel, wondering how long I had been a fool. Then they stopped. It wasn't a hotel. It wasn't even an apartment complex. It was a small, trendy lounge tucked between two high-rise buildings. The kind of place where couples sat in dimly lit corners, where hands brushed over candlelit tables, where conversations dipped just below the music so no one else could hear. I pulled over across the street, my pulse hammering. She had told me this was a casual dinner. She had told me I had nothing to worry about. But now, I was watching her step inside a place designed for stolen moments. A part of me wanted to burst through the doors, demand answers, force her to look me in the eyes and tell me what the hell she was doing. But another part of me, the part that had been patient for too long, knew that tonight wasn't about confrontation. Tonight was about confirmation. I needed to see this through. I needed to know just how deep the betrayal ran. So I stepped out of my car, took a slow breath, and followed them inside. I stepped inside the lounge, my heartbeat drumming in my ears. The place was dimly lit, the kind of intimate atmosphere designed for whispered conversations and stolen glances. Soft jazz hummed through the speakers, blending seamlessly with the low murmur of voices. I paused just past the entrance, scanning the room. Lorraine and the man were already seated at a small corner booth, half hidden behind a decorative partition. A flickering candle sat between them, casting shadows across their faces. I felt my stomach twist. This wasn't a casual work dinner. This wasn't just two colleagues grabbing a drink after a long day. The way she leaned in, the way he reached out, resting a hand lightly on hers. It told me everything I needed to know. I forced myself to breathe. I had come here for answers, not to make a scene. I needed to know exactly what was happening, how deep this ran. And so, instead of marching over and confronting her, I did something I never thought I'd do. I sat down at the bar, ordered a drink I had no intention of touching, and watched. Minutes stretched into eternity as I observed every little movement, every detail. Lorraine laughed, really laughed, the kind of laugh she hadn't given me in months. I watched as the man leaned closer, his voice just low enough that she had to move toward him to hear. She didn't hesitate. If anything, she looked like she wanted to be closer. And then, the final crack in the illusion happened. Her phone lit up on the table. My name. She glanced at it, hesitated for half a second, then flipped it over, screen down. I should have left. Right then and there, I should have walked out, gone home, started planning my next move. But instead, I stayed. I listened. And then I heard it. I hate sneaking around like this. Lorraine's voice. Soft, almost playful. The man chuckled. Then why don't we stop? She sighed, stirring her drink absently. Because it's complicated. You know that. Complicated. That was the word she chose. Not wrong. Not impossible. Just complicated. I felt something cold settle inside me. They continued talking, their voices dropping lower, but I had already heard enough. This wasn't a one-time thing. This wasn't a drunken mistake. This was something planned, something ongoing, something with history. And in that moment, something inside me changed. I wasn't going to sit back and be the fool anymore. I wasn't going to be the husband she pitied. I was going to make sure that when she finally looked me in the eyes, she would understand exactly what she had lost. I left the lounge before she could see me. Walking back to my car, my legs felt heavier than they should have, as if every step was forcing me to carry the weight of what I had just witnessed. My mind was quiet, too quiet. I expected rage, betrayal, the overwhelming urge to turn back and call her out right then and there. But all I felt was a cold, eerie stillness, like my body had shut down anything unnecessary to focus on the one undeniable fact: my wife was lying to me. Not just lying, she was living a second life. One where I didn't exist. I sat in my car, gripping the wheel, staring blankly at the windshield as city lights blurred into streaks. My mind reeled, replaying every word, every glance, every small hesitation she had ever given me in the last few months. Was it all a lie? How long had this been going on? Was it just this guy, or were there others? How many nights had I kissed her goodbye, thinking she was heading out for just dinner while she was meeting him? My hands tightened until my knuckles turned white. I didn't want to think about it. But the pieces were falling into place too fast to ignore. This wasn't just an affair, it was something deeper. She wasn't just fooling around, she was emotionally invested. That was what cut the deepest. The way she had looked at him, the way she had laughed, the way she had leaned in, touched his hand like it was second nature. She had felt safe with him. Safe enough to say, I hate sneaking around. I exhaled sharply, forcing myself to focus. This wasn't the time for an emotional breakdown. I needed clarity. I needed to figure out my next move. For the first time in our marriage, I wasn't going to sit back and be the oblivious, trusting husband. I was going to take control of the situation. I pulled out my phone, my hands steady as I opened my call log and scrolled down to a familiar name. Paul. My oldest friend. Someone I trusted. Someone who had been through this himself years ago when his own wife had done the same thing to him. I hesitated for a second before hitting dial. He picked up on the second ring. Hey man, what's up? I didn't bother with small talk. I need your help. There was a pause, then his voice dropped in tone. What's going on? I took a deep breath. It's Lorraine. She's cheating. Silence. Then a slow, measured sigh. Tell me everything. And so I did. I told him about the dinner, the way she had dismissed me so quickly, the way she had turned off her location. I told him about following her downtown, about the wine bar, about the way she had been with that man, too comfortable, too familiar. And finally, I told him about what I had overheard. Paul didn't interrupt. He let me spill everything out, and by the time I finished, I realized my hands were shaking. Not from sadness. Not from anger. From the sheer weight of it all. Finally, he spoke. I know you, man. You're not going to let this slide. No, I said, my voice steady. I'm not. So what's the plan? That was the real question, wasn't it? How do you respond to something like this? Do you wait and gather more proof? Do you confront her immediately? Do you let her dig her own grave? I wasn't sure yet. But one thing was crystal clear: I wasn't going to be passive. I wasn't going to let her make me the fool. I had the upper hand now. And I was going to use it. I sat in my car long after hanging up with Paul, staring at the glowing dashboard, my mind caught between action and restraint. There was a strange kind of numbness settling in now, like my body had decided to protect me from fully processing the weight of what I had just confirmed. I was past the initial shock, past the gut punch of realizing that my wife, my partner of nearly a decade, had carved out a secret life behind my back. I knew Paul was right. I couldn't just sit back and wait. I had to do something. But what? Confronting her outright would be too easy. She'd deny it, spin the story, gaslight me into questioning myself. That was the thing about Lorraine: she was smart. She knew how to twist a situation to make herself the victim, how to shift the blame until I was the one apologizing for even suspecting her. I had seen her do it to friends, coworkers, even strangers. She wasn't just going to crumble under pressure and confess. No. I needed to make sure she couldn't weasel her way out of this. I needed undeniable proof. I clenched my jaw, my fingers drumming against the steering wheel as my brain worked through every possible angle. I had photos, yes, but they were just vague enough that she could talk her way around them. I had overheard their conversation, but without a recording, it was just my word against hers. I needed more. And I knew exactly how to get it. Step 1, the setup. Lorraine thought she was in control. That much was clear. She thought she could come home, kiss me goodnight, and live this double life without consequences. That false sense of security was my advantage. So I played my role. By the time I walked through our front door, she was already home, curled up on the couch with a blanket over her legs, scrolling through her phone like she hadn't just spent the evening whispering secrets with another man. She barely glanced up. "Hey, babe. You were out late." I swallowed the bile rising in my throat and forced a casual smile. "Yeah, grabbed a drink with Paul after work." She nodded, seemingly satisfied with the answer. If she had any suspicions about where I had been, she didn't show it. Her attention was back on her phone, her fingers moving swiftly across the screen. Texting him, probably. Making plans. It took everything in me not to snap. Instead, I walked over, pressed a kiss to the top of her head like I always did, and muttered, "I'm exhausted. Gonna shower and head to bed." She hummed in response, barely acknowledging me. I turned away, walking toward the bathroom, my mind already on the next phase of my plan. Step 2, the trail she didn't know she left. Lorraine had always been careful, but nobody was perfect. And for all her deception, she had gotten comfortable, too comfortable. The moment I was out of sight, I pulled out my phone and opened our shared mobile carrier account. It was a little trick I had learned a while back, something most people never thought to check. Every call, every text message, who she contacted, how long they talked, it was all logged right there, plain as day. I scrolled through the records, my pulse hammering in my ears. And there it was. The same unfamiliar number. Over and over again. Dozens of calls. Some short, some stretching over an hour. But it wasn't just the frequency, it was when she had called him. Late at night, when she thought I was asleep. During her lunch breaks, when I was at work. Even on weekends, when I had been right in the next room. She had been careful. But not careful enough. I copied the number and ran a reverse lookup. Within seconds, a name popped up. Owen Calloway. The name meant nothing to me. I didn't recognize it. He wasn't one of our mutual friends, wasn't someone I had ever heard her mention before. But I had his name now. And that was enough. Step 3, the trap. Lorraine didn't know that I was onto her. And that gave me the power to control how this played out. I wasn't going to let her keep lying. I wasn't going to sit through another night of forced small talk while she texted him under the table, pretending like everything was normal. No, I wanted to see her squirm. I walked back into the living room, pretending to dry my hair with a towel. "Hey, babe." She glanced up. I kept my expression neutral. "I ran into an old buddy from college today. Owen Calloway. Do you know him?" It was subtle. Just enough bait to see how she'd react. And sure enough, her fingers stopped moving on her phone. She froze for half a second. Barely noticeable, but I saw it. Then she blinked, tilted her head slightly, and forced a confused laugh. "Owen Calloway? No, don't think so." "Why?" I let the silence stretch just a little too long before shrugging. "No reason. Just thought his name sounded familiar." I walked past her, barely holding back my smirk. She had just confirmed everything I needed to know. She was lying. And she knew I knew. And now? Now I just had to wait for her to crack. The next morning, I woke up before Lorraine. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, feeling strangely calm. The anger, the hurt, the betrayal, it was all still there, but it no longer felt like it had control over me. I had been living in a lie for far too long, but now, for the first time in a long time, I was in control. I got up, got dressed, and walked into the kitchen. I made coffee like I always did, but this time there was no weight in my chest, no lingering doubt. I had spent half the night thinking through my next move, and now everything was clear. Lorraine walked in a few minutes later, hair tousled, wrapped in a robe, rubbing her eyes. "Morning," she mumbled, heading straight for the coffee. I leaned against the counter, watching her. There was no guilt in her face. No sign that she had spent last night texting the man she swore she didn't know. No hesitation as she went about her morning routine, comfortable in the false reality she had created. But she had no idea that her game was already over. I let her take a few sips of coffee before I spoke. "I know, Lorraine." She blinked, looking up at me over the rim of her mug. "Know what?" I tilted my head slightly, keeping my expression unreadable. "Owen Calloway." The reaction was instant. A flicker of something in her eyes, panic, shock, calculation, all flashing by in the span of a second before she quickly masked it. She set her cup down slowly. "I told you I don't know. Don't." My voice was firm, even. "I don't want to hear another lie. I know everything. The dinners. The calls. The texts. All of it." Silence. She opened her mouth, then closed it again. I could see the wheels turning, her brain scrambling for a way out, a way to manipulate the situation. But there was no way out. I don't know what you're talking about, she finally said, but the crack in her voice betrayed her. I sighed, shaking my head. Lorraine, I gave you every chance to be honest. Every chance to tell me the truth. And you still won't. That tells me everything I need to know. Her hands clenched on the counter. Are you seriously accusing me of cheating? Do you even hear yourself? You're being ridiculous. I pulled out my phone and slid it across the counter toward her. Go ahead. Call Owen. Put him on speaker. If you really don't know him, this should be easy. She didn't move. She just stood there, her face pale, her breathing shallow. That's what I thought, I said quietly. For the first time, I saw fear in her eyes. Not fear of me, but fear of losing control. Fear of the truth being undeniable. She knew she was caught. And she knew I wasn't going to let her twist the narrative. The choice. I exhaled, rubbing my temples. Look, Lorraine, I'm not going to drag this out. I deserve better. And you know it. You made your choice when you started sneaking around. Now, I'm making mine. Her lips parted slightly. What does that mean? It means I'm done. I pushed a folder across the counter, divorce papers. I had called a lawyer the night before, and while nothing was finalized, I wanted her to see that I wasn't bluffing. She swallowed hard, staring at the papers like they were a loaded gun. You're not serious, she whispered. I met her gaze. I've never been more serious in my life. Silence stretched between us, thick with everything left unsaid. Then, for the first time since this all started, her mask cracked. Tears welled in her eyes, but I didn't feel sympathy. Not anymore. This wasn't sadness for what she had done, it was sadness for what she was about to lose. She started, but I cut her off. I don't need an explanation. I don't need excuses. I just need you to sign. She looked down, blinking rapidly. She knew there was no point in fighting it. After a long, heavy moment, she picked up the pen. And she signed. The beginning of something new. The next few weeks passed in a blur. There were tears, apologies, desperate attempts from Lorraine to fix things, but it was too late. I had already moved on in my heart long before the ink dried on our divorce. And surprisingly, I didn't feel broken. I didn't feel like my world had ended. In fact, I felt free. I moved out, got my own place, and for the first time in years, I felt like I was breathing fresh air again. No more doubts. No more second-guessing. No more living under someone else's lies. One evening, I met up with Paul for drinks, something I hadn't done in years without feeling guilty about leaving Lorraine home alone. He clapped me on the back, grinning. You look good, man. Like a weight's been lifted. And for the first time in a long time, I smiled. A real, genuine smile. Because I wasn't just surviving. I was finally living.